Provide a philosophical link between psychology, neuroscience, and anthropology. Professor Prinz graduated with honors from the University of New York in 1992. His senior thesis was titled A Logic of Vagueness and was awarded Best in Arts and Sciences. He then received his PhD with honors from the University of Chicago in 1997. His dissertation was titled Perceptual Cognition, a Study in the Semantics of Thought. Prinz has been a member of the Executive Committee for the International Society for Research on Emotion since 2004. The Society of Philosophy and Psychology has awarded Jesse Prinz the Stanton Prize for Noble Achievement in Cognitive Science in 2003. He has published numerous articles on concepts, emotions, morals, and consciousness. In addition, he has ventured into various topics and authored books such as Gut Reactions, A Perceptual Theory of Emotion, which was awarded a Choice Outstanding Academic Title of 2005. Jesse Prinz is also the author of Furnishing the Mind, Concepts and Their Perceptual Basis, and The Emotional Construction of Morals. He also has 2 forthcoming books titled Beyond Human Nature and The Conscious Brain. Today, he will be presenting one of his recent works, Waiting for the Self. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jesse Prinz.
Thanks for that. Was such a nice introduction and kind of high pressure. I have to live up to that, but also I have to live up to the talks that came before, and it's especially hard to follow just on the heels of Eric Schritzgabel's tour de force, so this is guaranteed to be a letdown. And just to conceal my shame, but not to conceal my thematically appropriate T-shirt, I'm going to ask Heather to turn the lights off, so you won't see me blush. Okay, let me say one more thing. It's a great honor to be at this conference, not only because of the distinguished speakers, but because of the great tradition of this conference. And Jilu and all the student organizers have done a fantastic job in bringing this together this year. I should say, too, I have a special affection for Cal State Fullerton. I think of it as sort of my California home away from home, so it's really a great privilege to be back again and see you all. With most things I care about, the story begins with this guy, David Hume, and pretty much everything I write is footnotes on Hume, so here I'm just going to be committing another act of plagiarism. And the particular bit of Hume I want to plagiarize today is summarized in this famous quotation. Hume says, "Whenever I enter most intimately in what I call myself, I always stumble upon some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." What Hume is suggesting here is that when we introspect and try and find something in the qualitative character of experience that is an experience of the self, we seem to fail. We don't find a self there. All we find are the things that we're currently perceiving or thinking about or feeling. We don't find the self who's thinking those things, the self who's perceiving those things or feeling those things. And what I want to try and do is defend Hume's skepticism, but in response to some recent work in the cognitive sciences that have tried to identify a basis for the phenomenal experience of the self. Now, just for clarification, what's not at issue here, I don't want to deny that there is a metaphysical self. I want to be agnostic about this question, which is to say, I'm not saying there are no selves. What I want to say, echoing Hume, is that there's no experience of a self as such. And likewise, I don't want to deny that we ever have an experience of the self as an object. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you feel a pain, say, in your foot is part of you. You're clearly feeling your pain in your foot. So there's a sense in which it's obvious that we can have experiences of the self. But there, when you're experiencing a pain in your foot, your self is serving as an object, not as the subject of the experience. One way to think about this is the sentence we use to express such a state would be something like, I feel a pain in my foot. And notice there are two first-person pronouns there. There's the initial I, the feeler of the pain, and then there's the my, the possessive pronoun of my foot. And I don't want to deny the second one. What I really want to challenge is that there's ever an experience of oneself as a subject of experience. That when you have a pain in your foot, there are two things going on. The experience of the pain and the experience of you, the feeler of that pain. A term one could use here is the idea of I qualia, that there are qualitative states that correspond to the I in such first-person reports. And a believer, a realist about I qualia would say, when you look at an apple, for example, there are two things you experience. There's the apple, and then there's some kind of I-ness that comes along with the experience of the apple. And in defending this sort of view, you might have a couple of different approaches. One approach would be a non-reductive approach. And the non-reductive approach would say there's just a special character that is the character of the experience of an I that's not reducible or explainable in terms of the character of anything else. It's just one of the basic primitives out of which experiences are built. A reductive view would say, no, in fact, the I can be explained in terms of something else. There is an I in experience, but that I in experience is not a primitive. It's ultimately explicable in some other way. So for example, when you're grasping an apple, you might have an experience of the apple and an experience of the grasping. And on a reductive view, you might say the experience of an I, of a self as subject, is an experience of the grasping of the apple. And that's the kind of view I want to consider as well. I'm ultimately going to try and argue against both reductive and non-reductive views. In other words, I'm going to be a kind of eliminativist about the phenomenal self, about I quality. So I'm going to deny, I'm going to say that neither reductive or non-reductive approaches succeed in establishing any I quality. So let's begin with non-reductive theories. So non-reductive theories, again, are ones that say there's a phenomenal I, but the phenomenal I is not reducible to anything else. It's a basic primitive in experience. One might see traces of this idea on a certain reading of Descartes. So when Descartes talks about I think, therefore I am, and he says, I know there is thought, I know I am a thinking thing. This is the kind of issue that came out in Professor Gretzky's talk this morning. One might read Descartes as assuming that there's an experience of an I as the thinker of those thoughts, as something above and beyond those thoughts and available in experience. And there are various ways to read this view into Descartes. The question becomes, what's Descartes' reason for believing there is an I available in experience? Oh, we made Descartes smile, so this is Descartes would like a view of this kind. One sort of view would be a deductive view, where we can just by some sort of logical deduction conclude from the availability of a thought in experience to the conclusion that there is a thinker of that thought. So if you deduce the presence of a thinker from the presence of the thought, you might have an argument for the existence of an I. Now, there's a question about whether the deductive move will succeed. This is a picture of Lichtenberg, who famously remarked that in Descartes, there's a fallacious inference from the presence of thought to the presence of a thinker. Introspection can only deliver the conclusion that there is thought, not that there's a thinker of those thoughts. Now, even if you believe there's some fancy argument that could be used to go from the presence of a thought to a presence of a thinker, for example, some people identify in Descartes an appeal to some sort of scholastic notion of substance that might do that work. It wouldn't follow from the deductive move that there is such a thing as an I quale, or I qualia, which is to say, you could, if you can deduce the presence of a subject, it's not necessarily a conscious subject. The thinker might not be anything we experience. It might be unconsciously present as the subject of experience. So it's not clear that a purely deductive argument for a phenomenal I would give us reason to believe that there's a phenomenal experience of the self. Now, if you're convinced by this, you might think there's another move available. Maybe a latter-day Cartesian could say we directly experience the self, and we know this from introspection. It's introspectively obvious that there's an I present as the subject of all of my experiences. And it's hard to find this kind of argument in the literature.